Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Carl Blackstone with the Columbia Chamber. We're delighted you're here with us today to learn a little bit more about the recent cities tax study that they did, performed by Rebecca Gunlison. And it's a great tool for us as business folks in the city of Columbia to understand really where our tax dollars are going and what direction we're going in. And so I want to thank, before I introduce him, I want to thank Daniel Rickman, member of City Council, for really pushing this study. And many of y'all know Daniel. He's been a friend of the business community, been part of this business community for many years. And so Daniel, with that, I want to turn it over to you and let you introduce Rebecca and really give your thoughts on why the study is so important. I think it's phenomenal information to have, and probably one of the best tools that we can have right now at this time. So so thanks for your leadership on that, and I'll turn it over to you, Daniel.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Good morning, Ms. Baskins, Ms. McPherson, and Dr. Goodlogson. Glad to be joining y'all this morning. It's, this study is really a culmination of City Council coming together and recognizing that, for years we've had challenges of figuring out how to stay competitive and why our tax structure is higher in others, which has multiple phases to it and forms. And so to really understand it, we really needed to take a big, deep dive into it. And so we engaged Dr. Gunlogson to put this study together. And, this is a real tool for us as a community because it involves both the state, the county, the school board, the city, and various other folks who are engaged and are beneficial of our tax structure and how that affects each person. And this isn't just for the business community, it's for anybody who's affected by property tax, which is pretty much everybody, because it's renters, it's homeowners, it's business owners, it's investors, it's future development. And one of the things that we want to do is create an atmosphere of great soil conditions so that we can grow businesses and continue to fill those empty retail spaces, to get new investment, continue to grow vertical growth, and really get investment throughout our community and be competitive in the state. We used to be the largest city in South Carolina. Now we're number 2. We have lagged behind in investment over the last probably 15 years. And so why is that? What is affecting that? And so if we have the ability to take this as a tool and get everybody engaged so that everybody understands that this is something that will really help us move forward as a community as a whole, which then affects really the MSA of Columbia. So with that, I'm going to let Dr. Goodlogson take the screen away. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. And I'd really like to thank the City of Columbia and the Columbia Chamber, the City Center, Vista, 5 Points, and Divine Street Associations, and all of you really for having me here today. It really is quite an important topic, and I am genuinely honored to be a part of the discussion. And I would look forward to feedback at the end as well. So I think I'm going to try to share my presentation right now, and we'll see if that goes well. You can tell me if you are indeed seeing it. Does everyone see? Is someone seeing that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
excellent. Okay, perfect. Okay, so before we begin, I would like to give a little bit of background on the study. So coming out of the Great Recession, the U.S. has seen very large growth in construction, capital deployment, jobs, income, et cetera. And South Carolina in particularly has grown more rapid than the nation. In fact, we ranked 8th fastest in compounded annual GDP growth since then. The city of Columbia, however, has witnessed much slower growth than its city counterparts in South Carolina. In particular, we've significantly lagged the state in areas of growth in private firms, growth in private GDP, growth in employment, growth in wages, and we lag in educational attainment, both in college and in high school. And it's also population growth. You can actually see Richland County, the tan bars, has had slower growth than its peer areas. And in fact, the city of Columbia, which is the blue line, has actually witnessed 3 consecutive years of population declines. And the makeup of the population is perhaps even more important. So this shows the number of people between the ages of 25 and 54. It's the prime age population, those who are most likely to work and drive GDP growth. And the Columbia MSA has lagged the other metro areas of the state, as well as the state average in growth since 2010. And this is particularly interesting because Columbia has a significantly higher percentage of population aged 18 to 24, which is driven by universities and their associated student population. But that advantage fades out when we get to the 25 to 54 age group. The students aren't staying after they graduate. And the question is why? So recently, the area's high property tax rates have emerged to the forefront of discussions as being the driving factor behind the city's slower growth. And actually, you can see that the city of Columbia's combined city, county, and school millage rates are indeed significantly higher than our peer cities. So they are 38% higher than Rock Hill, 65% higher than Greenville, 95% higher than Charleston. So the city of Columbia actually took it upon itself to commission this study to evaluate property tax rates of the local area and their impact on property owners, economic growth, and resulting tax revenues. Now, the study itself is 81 pages, and it really performs a deep evaluation of a number of state and local property and tax data sets. And in particular, we focused on why our local rates are so high. Now, for some time, one of the driving explanations has been that the city has more exempt property than other areas. So that's owned by government and nonprofits, universities, and so forth. And that would require a higher tax rate on remaining taxable properties to generate the same level of revenues. So today, I want to run through what some of the possible causes of our high property tax rates are, and then I want to go over some solutions to help chart the path forward. So we'll start with the causes, and first, we are going to look at the most burning question, which is, does the city of Columbia have more tax-exempt property? Well, the short answer is a little bit, but it's not enough to drive such a high tax rate disparity. So I want to warn you that when we compare, comparing this across cities has a huge apples to oranges component to it, but we'll try to parse through that. So if we look at the city of Columbia specifically, there's 45,600 some odd parcels of land within the city limits. 7.8% of them are fully exempt. Now, the listed market value is much higher. And I want to make a note about this. State law does not require exempt properties to be appraised. So the Richland County Assessor's Office specifically said that the values on these properties are not accurate. Greenville actually told me the exact same thing. So they don't even have many values assigned to most properties that are exempt. Rock Hill did not even include the market value because it was inaccurate. And since then, I've actually spoken with Spartanburg, who also does not report any market values of exempt properties. So I actually went back and forth on whether or not to report these, but really, I prefer to get everything out there and then discuss the data shortcomings. So finally, we have the acreage, and this is not that total acreage of exempt properties in the city of Columbia is 35%. And this does not include Fort Jackson, which is almost 52,000 acres. And while it is in the city limits, it is an independent entity, and the city does not provide services to it in the same way it does other parcels. Now, thanks to the city's CFO, Jeff Palin, we were able to get exempt property summaries from Greenville and Rock Hill through his contacts there. If we look at Greenville and Rock Hill, they have slightly fewer exempt properties, parcels, as well as acreage. And Spartanburg actually got back after this study was published, and 9.55% of its parcels within the city are exempt. Nationally, there have been surprisingly few studies done on exempt properties, which is likely due to the fact that each kind of categorizes and assesses them slightly differently. However, governing did do one back in 2012 among select large cities. And assuming that these cities truly account for exempt properties the same way, across the board, we can see that if we compare it to our data from 2019, right here, you see all the South Carolina cities actually have more exempt parcels as a percentage of total than the national average, with Columbia being higher. If we look at exempt parcels per capita, again, all the SC cities, oh, I'm sorry, this is, if we look with regards to the values, again, I have to say it's not accurate, but if it were, Columbia would be right at the national average. Parcels per capita, the South Carolina cities all seem to have slightly more exempt properties. However, if we look at taxable parcels per capita, also all the South Carolina cities seem to be above average as well. So, and there is a full breakout of every exempt parcel by ownership and the type in the study. So ultimately, what does all of this mean? So it is true that Columbia does have slightly more exempt parcels and acreage, but ultimately, there's not that significant enough a gap for exempt properties alone to be the primary force driving the high property tax rates or the difficulty in collecting sufficient revenues through property taxation. So what might be the other causes of our high property taxes? And there's really only three other possibilities. So one, it could be that Columbia relies on fewer other revenues. It could be that our high property tax rates are due to the fact that we have very little in the way of other revenue sources, and therefore we just rely on property taxes too heavily. And the answer to this is no, not really. In fact, it seems to be quite the opposite. The city of Columbia receives a smaller percentage, just 19.4% of its total revenues from property taxes than did other cities in fiscal year 19. And so by comparison, Charleston was 47%, Greenville was 53%, and Rock Hill was 36%. We rely much more on sales taxes, licenses, and permits. So in a manner of speaking, what we're seeing is that Columbia makes up for the lack of property tax revenues through other sources. So another reason it could be that we spend more than other cities. And if we need to spend more, then we would need higher taxes to support that spending. And here, the answer generally points to the yes side, but it's very complicated in layers of spending, and we really have to break it down by taxing entity. So if we look at school revenues per pupil, the school districts in Columbia generally do have higher revenues per student. Those are the ones highlighted in blue. And this is for the 2018-19 school year, if the more recent ones are actually higher. So you can see right here, these are the dark blue, that's the local revenues raised per student. That's almost entirely raised from property tax. And then after that, we have state revenues and then federal revenues at the top and the total amount per student. And we see this played out in the millage rates. Now, school millage rates can be divided into two categories. One to fund operations, which is in the brown, and the other to pay back bond debt that's used to fund construction, which is in the blue. And here are the City of Columbia 3 districts, and you can see that they are indeed all higher than all of our peer cities. Richland 2 actually has the highest millage rate in the state. Now, the other component of revenues is that of the city and county, and combined, Richland and the Richland County and the City of Columbia do actually net higher revenues per capita than the other city-county pairs, save Charleston. And I want to note that it's very important that the city and county pairs are evaluated together because each pair is very different in the way they distribute services and costs between each other and among their special purpose districts. So looking at the entire package is really necessary for this. Okay, and then we come to the last possible reason for our high property tax rates. And it may be that the value of our properties are lower than our peer cities, which would require higher tax rates to generate the same level of revenues. And here, actually, the finding is a resounding yes. So this first chart shows the total value of property in the county, Richland County, or all the counties per person. And you can see that Richland is the lowest of all of these counties. And often people will look at this and say, Well, this proves that we have more exempt property. Otherwise, we'd have a higher value per person. But that doesn't take into account the valuation of each property. And so here's the average value of each real property in, and you can see that it is generally less than most of the other counties. The average value of our personal property, which is cars and boats and airplanes, is actually lower as well. But I think the most important and compounding issue is that we face an exceptionally slow growth rate. You can see since 2010, Richland has only, all of the value of our real property has only grown 3.4% versus very, very high growth rates for all of these other counties. And we've really seen this across all property types. If we look at owner occupied property, since 2010, we've seen a 2% growth in all owner occupied in Richland. Commercial has lagged all of these counties except Lexington. Motor vehicles is at the median, so we're not really lagging there. Business personal property has been effectively stagnant, and that's a direct reflection of the growth in firms. And utility, we have actually done well. Now, manufacturing, you see a negative 12%. You actually see negative on a number of these counties, and that is because as onerous as our commercial property tax rate, our manufacturing is even worse. And so we see the conversion of many of these manufacturing property tax rates to these tax favored fee in lieu and industrial park. And you can see even in that, we have dramatically lagged the rest of the counties. Now we are actually able to take a deep dive into owner occupied and commercial properties. So for owner occupied properties in Richland County, the units actually grew at 3.2%, which is much slower than all of these other, but you can see there's a lot of disparity across school districts. So you see Richland 1 actually saw a decline in owner occupied units, whereas Richland 2 and Lexington 5 actually saw a pretty significant growth in units. So, again, Richland 1, they either, converted to commercial or came off the tax rolls. The average value actually declined 1.3% of all owner occupied properties, and or the average value declined 1.3%, and then the total value only increased 1.9%, again, versus very, very dramatic growth in all of these other counties. Now we can do the same thing for commercial properties. And you can see that among commercial units, the county has had a slight decline over the period, primarily due to the decline of units in Richland 2, as they converted to owner occupied or ceased to be developed for that purpose. Lexington and York are also highly residential counties, and they have actually also seen a loss in commercial units as well. The average value has increased 11.8%, which again, much slower by at least half than the other counties. And then overall, the total value increased about the same as the average value. And I really want to focus on this trend that we're seeing across school districts. So we have many families who live in Richland District 2 and work in Richland District 1. So Richland 2 has been gaining pupils up almost 15% since 2010, and Richland 1 has been losing pupils down 4.4% since that time. And this trend has been going on since at least 2001, which is far back as I have data for. And it goes hand in hand with the significant growth in owner-occupied housing units in Richland 2, which, due to Act 388, actually provide no school operations revenue to support that new growth. Richland 2 is also losing commercial property as it either converts to owner-occupied or ceases to grow, which causes the district to lose more school operating revenue, and thus drives further increases in taxes on the remaining property. Now, conversely, Richland 1 is actually losing owner-occupied housing, and due to Act 388, this conversion to commercial and or rental actually increases school operating tax revenue, even if it results in fewer pupils. So essentially the economic and demographic dynamics that are going on in Richland County are working against each other with regard to school system finance. And I also want to point out, I found this really interesting. There's an inflection point in property valuations in 2014. So the average value, this is commercial properties. You can see they fell in 2014. And actually the average value of residential properties also fell in 2014. So this is when Richland County did its 5-year reassessment. Now let's look at the growth in home price index this is a year-over-year increase in home price index by quarter. This is the Charleston MSA, here's the Greenville MSA, and you can see they both started growing in the first quarter of 2013. And here's the Colombia MSA. It was still in decline until the third quarter of 2014. So essentially we had a perfect storm of unfortunate factors, which combined with poor state policy. We had our 5-year reassessment come due in 2014. It occurred when a time when our home prices were depressed, and Act 388 limits property valuation for tax purposes to 15% over 5 years. So the 2014 reassessment locked in those depressed values, and due to the 15% increase limitation, that decline could never be fully made up once the market rebound did arrive. Those lower taxable values are now baked in, and it creates an inequity between owners of the same types of property, and it drives higher taxes on all other properties. And this will just continue to get worse as time goes on. So ultimately, the area finds itself caught in a continuous loop. We have high property tax rates that lead to slower growth and poor property valuations. In turn, these result in smaller tax revenue, which prompts leaders to increase tax rates, which further deters growth and depresses valuations. And it goes on and on. And here is actually how the loop has played out since 2010. So if we look at an area's property tax revenues, there's really 3 ways that they can be increased. One, we can increase the actual number of housing or commercial units. So we can new construction, which increases the tax base. 2, we can have an average increase in average value per unit. So the property becomes more valuable, which produces higher tax revenues. And then the third way is we can actually increase the tax rates or the millage rates here. So if we look at commercial and rental property since 2010, in Richland County, of all the estimated increase in property taxes, we see in brown that there was a slight decline due to the decline in units that actually took away from tax revenues. 32.5% of new tax revenues was from the increase in the value of the property, and 67.7% was from the increase in tax rates. Now, owner-occupied property is unfortunately a lot grimmer picture. So of all the estimated increase in property tax rates from owner-occupied revenues from owner-occupied properties, the increase in units accounted for 12.8%. The decrease in property values took away 5.3%, which means that 92.5% of all of the increase in tax revenues was due to an increase in tax rates. And again, it is really a story of taxing entity. You need to look across all of the components that make up our total tax rates. And the city of Columbia, we can actually see that on the left-hand side, actually saw a decline in 2019, which resulted from the 2019 countywide reassessment. Richland County has increased their rates 23.7%, pretty significantly faster than all of their peer counties, save York. And Richland 1, despite losing pupils and gaining commercial property, still increased their rate 14%. And Richland 2 increased their rates faster than all districts except for Greenville. So the question is really, how do we lay the groundwork for future growth? And not just sort of temporary spurts of growth that fade away, but growth that is self-sustaining into the future and positively impacts all of our citizens. So we have an outline of 4 steps that we can take to put the area on that path. And unfortunately, they're not really 4 options where you can pick one or another. They really are all part of the same plan. And so I want to run through that real quick. So first and most importantly, we need to make commercial property tax rates competitive. Otherwise, we will keep losing investment or prevent it from happening in the first place. So the high tax rates are truly causing a crisis of disinvestment, which can be seen in our declining population, our slow income and job growth, and our depressed asset valuation. So here is what we would need. We would need a 48% reduction to be on par with Charleston. And I'm not saying we need to do this specifically, but I'm just saying here's what it would take to be on par with each of these cities: a 33% for Greenville and an 18% to be on par with Rock Hill. Now, most importantly, whatever is implemented, it will require a coordinated effort between city and county entities, including an agreement on, what will the targeted competitive tax rate be? How quick would the phase-in period be, and how would it be structured? What would be the pace of tax reduction over the phase-in period? And then either a limitation on spending or identification of some other area of savings during that phase-in period. Now, there are a couple of possibilities of how this could be accomplished. So first, we could look at creating an exemption just for commercial and rental properties. So those that are assessed at 6%. Since these are the properties with the most onerous rates. It would require developing some sort of county level legislation to phase in a property tax exemption to all 6% properties. We could effectively, reduce their assessment rate to 5% or 4% or some other targets, and all tax revenues from new development would fund all the further exemption increases. I think this could be implemented in much the same way that Act 40 of 2017 effectively reduced the 10.5% manufacturing assessment rate to 9% by giving an exemption of 14.2 something percent to property tax of manufacturing owners, and it was phased in over a period of 6 years. So we have a blueprint of how to do this. The second option, we could create some sort of citywide or multi-county industrial park structured at a targeted millage rate with some sort of phase in over time. This one is a little less optimal and a bit more complex in terms of structure, phase in, and coordination among taxing entities. However, there are two options that this really can be done. And I want to say why this is so important. So what we've been doing in the past to mitigate our high tax rates is providing large selective tax breaks to a few big developers in the hopes that it will encourage follow-on investment. And honestly, it is not just us. Our state property tax system is so skewed away from industry and commercial that it encourages all localities to do the exact same thing. So here in the chart is an example of a 50% SSRC granted in Colombia on a sample $40 million property. So if we count for city, county, school millages, and lost the local option sales tax credits, the annual tax ends up being $636,000 versus $1.27 million under the original tax rate. So now clearly the actual tax rate is onerous to the point that it deters that investment prior to the granting of this special tax break. But here are the problems with addressing the area's much larger tax problem scope with one single one-off tax incentive. So we end up with discounted tax rates that are actually lower than peer cities, including Charleston. So in other words, this particular tax rate may be more generous than is competitively necessary. The other thing is that businesses who are not eligible for a FILO or an MCIP or a SSRC pay a much higher rate, and it drives an unequal treatment of business and citizens. And it has both short-term and long-term implications in depressing growth and startups, particularly among our smaller and local businesses. The other thing is that the job and income creation is not necessarily guaranteed. So employment and income vary dramatically by industry. And industries like manufacturing or high tech produce numerous high-paying jobs for local residents, while many other industries like student housing, for example, do not necessarily do that. And finally, it is unlikely that these large projects with these large tax rates will actually attract the desired follow-on projects. So because all of the smaller new entrants will face the exact same high tax hurdle that prevented their large counterparts from developing in the first place. Ultimately, the selective tax rates for the developers thus far have not, and likely will not fuel the broad-based continued growth that the city needs. Instead, it will continue to drive a greater imbalance in the tax rates between a few select properties and all others, while not delivering on the promise of jobs and rising wages and increasing future development. Okay, so the second point, we really need to coordinate school system finances to make sure that they represent and support the economic synergies that take place across the region. We have economic and demographic dynamics going on in Richland County, which are working against each other. We have opposing pupil growth. It's driven by opposing owner-occupied housing and commercial property growth. And finally, both districts earn more revenues than their peer districts and the state average. If we don't identify a cooperative financial approach, we're going to see a continued acceleration of the commercial and owner-occupied trends and a worsening of the tax environment for both schools and taxable properties in their district. Okay, so the third step is to identify and implement competitive efficiencies. So depressed revenue from property taxes have made the city and the county more reliant on other taxes and fees. And most of these are generally higher than our peers, which further increases the cost of doing business and depresses investment further. Given the limited capacity to increase revenues from these other sources, we need to instead look for cost-saving measures during the phase-in period. So some options we could consider, we should, conduct a city and county efficiency study to identify opportunities to merge overlapping services and make the provision of those services less expensive. We should also look at remodeling, permitting, zoning, licensing, et cetera, those types of processes with urban development best practices that encourage growth. If business growth is a goal for the area, we should work towards modeling processes to assist them and encourage their development. Okay, so the final step is we should actively petition the General Assembly. That seems harder. That seems hard, but Act 388 of 2006, it's not the main driver of the problem here, but it facilitates it, and the trends will intensify over time, both on property valuations and on school system growth patterns. So among options, we can start with the most unlikely to happen, which is a full repeal of Act 388. That would enable accurate appraisals and a broad-based equalization of school operating taxes across all property types. But a more realistic option might be going for a partial repeal just of the 15% valuation limit. And even if that seems like too heavy a lift, maybe a one-time waiver to accurately appraise all properties and apply the resulting revenue increases to corresponding millage rate decreases. So a net revenue neutral one-time act. And this is really important because 31.6% of the City of Columbia parcels have a taxable value that's less than their fair market value. It equates to approximately 541 million in market value. And this will just continue to get worse as time goes on, and it will eventually discourage land ownership transfers or encourage people to find legal ways around it. So ultimately, these all may seem like heavy lifts, but they are indeed all doable. The policies and the phase-in periods will need to be crafted using data-driven solutions. But that really actually is the easiest part. Most importantly, it will take a collaborative and coordinated effort among city, county, and school districts to develop a solution that promotes sustained economic growth for the region for the future. So that essentially that concludes my presentation, and I would be delighted to answer questions or have any sort of discussion that people might have.
Hey, thank you, Rebecca. Really interesting stuff. And guys, we did a webinar type of presentation today. So if y'all have questions anybody on the line, we need it in the Q&A section or the chat section. So while we have, well, hopefully somebody's typing. I do want to thank 5 Points and Vista Guild and Matt and City Center and Divine Street for helping us get the word out on this study today, and really thank Rebecca and Daniel for all their work on this, because it really highlights the need for some changes in the system to promote economic growth and development in our community. So, hey, Jennifer Suber's got it. Can you simplify that tax law you think needs to be repealed or revised? Specifically, in layman's term, I agree 388 probably ain't getting done, or total repeal of Act 388, but maybe a one-timer. Rebecca, how do you simplify that?
Yeah, well, 380, yeah, you are right. 388 is a very large law, and it has a lot of various property tax components, all of which seem to have had negative implications. But the one aspect was that it limits property tax valuations for taxable purpose. So every 5 years, when a county is required to do its reassessment, the taxable value of a property cannot be reassessed more than 15% from the 5 years previously. So, and what that does is that people who've owned their properties, regardless of what type of properties, for a very long time, will have lower and lower taxable values and pay less and less taxes than someone who might live right next door. The business that might be brand new and have a much the same exact type of structure would have a much higher tax rate. And also ultimately, it drives tax rates higher on all properties. So again, over 31% of properties within the city of Columbia have a taxable value less than the fair market value. And some of them are very close, within a few percentage points. But so one option, if we cannot actually repeal 388, would be to ask if we could do a one-time waiver, just to go through and accurately value all properties. Any additional revenues that result from that, we would use to actually lower the millage rates for everyone. So that's again, one possibility if we cannot get a repeal of that particular point of 388.
That's great. I asked, do we have a plan to how we move forward? Well, yes and no. Well, we have sent a letter. The chamber sent a letter to city leaders and asking for them to put together a group, and maybe before we've asked for that to kind of a blue ribbon committee, if you will, to address this. But Daniel, do you have any thoughts from council's perspective of how y'all plan to go forward with this?
Yeah, so the city started to engage our partners in the community, school board, county council, and slowly getting around to presenting the study and then asking for members to join a small working committee. And then we're going to sit down with the delegation as well and start that. Obviously with the holidays coming in between, the study presentations has slowed down things, but we are engaging with folks. And then I think we would like to, once we've identified those partners and had an opportunity to present it, bring in different community partners. We need to have neighborhood leaders. We need to have business leaders. We need to have a lot of people engaged in the process so that we can make sure that we touch everybody and that it's a community wide, because this is important. This is everybody's future, period. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. And for us not to address it. And, it's interesting because some people have pushed back on the study out there, hey, this isn't highlighting our community in a great thing, but what it really is, and why I thank council for really pushing it forward and engaging Dr. Gunlogson is that this is a tool that can change the face of our community for the future. And Dr. Stephen Walters, author of Boomtown, was here, last year. Yeah, it's been a year ago. And, one of the things he pointed out is that Columbia has so much potential, but it's handcuffed uniquely by not only Act 388, but all the other entities around it. He said, it's unfortunate and unfair, but if you sit in the middle of downtown and drive 20 minutes, you can go to 5 different counties where your tax structure is 50% less. That doesn't help us be competitive. And the people who are affected the most, I think, are the small businesses. And, we're not a big elephant town. We are a town, city that is built on small businesses, and we need to figure out how to embrace those. And what's interesting is, since this study has come out and talking to different people, it's really interesting as people start to analyze their tax bill and really understanding the effect. And some of the small business guys who are trying to hang on right now are like, between CAM, insurance, and my tax bill, I'm paying an extra $12 a square foot in rent. And I don't know if I can sustain that in this environment. So, I think it's really upon all the elected officials to get together and really, hey, we're all part of the problem, but we're also all part of the solution. And that's the way we got to look at it.
Yeah, great. And I think that's point needs to hit home again, that granted, this is not casting blame on anybody or any one entity. It is, we're all in this together, and we've got to figure this out for the betterment of this community and for future growth. We've got to come up with some solutions. So, absent any more questions, again, I want to thank Rebecca for your great work here, Daniel for your leadership in getting this through council, and I want to thank again the City of Columbia for putting forth the resources to get this study done. I think it really says a lot about how City of Columbia is functioning right now and looking out for the betterment of everybody. So thank you very much. And on behalf of the Chamber and our partners around town, thank you again for joining us today. We put a link in the chat for the study itself, and we'll probably have this recording up on our website this afternoon. So feel free to share, get the word out. We need everybody to, it's a heavy conversation, and I hope everybody had a cup of coffee before we started. But we want to thank everybody very much and for joining us and understanding this big topic. So y'all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.